all the post-Marxist thinkers have used Marxian theory uh, as a model for the understanding of the society by applying conflict perspective. Okay. So Marxian theory basically having certain concepts like contradiction and conflict. Then yesterday I have discussed that contradiction and conflict between whom? Marx. What Marx says that contradiction and conflict are the imminent nature of the society. Then I told you yesterday that all societies have passed through the four important stages. Right? One is the primitive society, ancient society, then feudal society, then capitalist society. So that means almost all societies have passed through these four important stages, and he visualized a fifth stage which he called it as a communist society. That was his visualization. But he said that every stage of human society except the first stage, societies were divided into two broad classes. Right? And those two broad classes were what? A dominant class and subject class. Right? So in primitive society there were no classes. Why? Because there was no concept of private property. And Marx made it very clear that the private property and accumulation of wealth are the main reasons for the emergence of a class. Okay. And while discussing about this, he made it very clear that every society have a basic structure and superstructure. You have to understand this it's very important. This is what even he called it as an infrastructure, basic structure or infrastructure. This basic structure and infrastructure is nothing but what? Economy. So that means this basic structure actually constitute of the forces of production. Forces of production include land, capital, technology, industries, raw material, etc. Right? So this infrastructure constitute of two classes. Right? One is what? A dominant class. Another one is a subject class. And what Marx says that the forces of production actually determine the relations of production. Try to understand. Forces of production determine the relations of production. Means what? For example, let me give one example. Like say I have 100 acres of land. I am a landlord. And take somebody, you are landless laborer. X person is a landless laborer. Okay. So the relationship between me and a landless laborer is determined by what? the land, possession of land. Suppose I lose my 100 acres land. Imagine if I lose my land, what happens? I become the laborer, landless laborer. I have to work for somebody. That means my position is based on what? My relationship with the land. If I am the owner of the land, I am a landlord. If I don't have the land, I am a landless laborer. So in every society, the relationship between a landlord and a laborer is determined by what? Land. Land is the forces of production. The relationship with the forces of production determines the relations of production. Would you get my point? Since I am the owner, I belong to a dominant class. Other person doesn't have ownership. He is only a worker. He is a wage worker. So that means in any given society, the forces of production determine the relationship between these two classes. That is a dominant class and subject class. Okay. So you take ancient society or feudal society or capitalist society. In all these stages, there were two classes, and one class used to own and control the forces of production, and another class, they used to work, right, for the dominant class, because they were not the owners of the forces of production. Do you get my point? Then another point, they said superstructure. This is called superstructure. Marx said superstructure is created and shaped by the basic structure. Superstructure includes, please try to understand, superstructure includes all other social institutions other than economy, like our political system, legal system, even political ideology, education system, religious system, our cultural system. All these are part of superstructure, including our family, even family, right? Religion, polity, education, all these are part of superstructure. But all these institutions are shaped in such a way, always they work in the interest of the dominant class. Did you get my point? So here you have a dominant class and subject class. But the subject class is only a weak class, though they have the large number, but they are being dominated by the dominant class, because a dominant class, they are the employer, and working class, this is a subject class, is a working class, they are employee. So invariably the subject class has to depend upon the dominant class. I told you, the relationship between these two classes is of mutual interdependence and exploitation. All these are the fundamental principles of Marx or Marxian theory. So in every stage, I told you, the ancient stage, there were two classes, master and slave. Then next feudal stage, landlord and serf. Then third, capitalist stage, a capitalist class and a proletarian class. But in all these stages, right, it is the dominant class which exploit the subject class. This is one. And secondly, Marx also said that in all these stages, your our legal system, political system, right, religious system, they are shaped in such a way that they always work in the interest of the dominant class. And another point, even in a capitalist society, what Marx says that the subject class is persuaded. They are persuaded in such a way that they accept all these systems. Right? Do you get my point? The subject class are persuaded in such a way that you accept our education system, accept our legal system, accept our political system. Okay? So, they create and shape those systems in such a way that the subject class accept it. Did you get my point? Though they are exploited by the dominant class, but a social environment is created in such a way that the subject class accept it. So that is why always there is a contradiction between. But what Marx says that even in spite of that, yes, there is exploitation, there is contradiction, there is conflict, but still society continues. That's what he has explained while discussing about contradiction and conflict. So if you carefully go through each line, you can understand how conflict exists, contradictions exist in every society. This is the essence. Then coming to another point, this is then exploitation and oppression. He used the term called exploitation and oppression. Marx was very clear that in a capitalist society, the subject class is always oppressed by using the institutions like state, law, police, etc. Because all of them are shaped in such a way they work in the interest of the dominant class. Do you get my point? You take any capitalist society. In a capitalist society, the state, that's what Marx says that even at the end he talked about ideology and false consciousness. For example, take democracy. In a democracy, we say that democracy as an ideology believes in equality. But in reality, there is no equality. Right? The employer and employee are never equal. Because the employee cannot bargain with the employer, because employer always have the upper hand. And even employers create a kind of ideology in such a way that it is the employer who is providing the livelihood for them. So therefore, employee accept the dominance of the employer, because for his own survival, he has to work, though his labor power is being exploited by the employer. So that is why what Marx said that in a capitalist society, capital as such produces nothing. It is the labor. Labor means what? The energy, the physical energy or mental energy, which is very important. It is the labor which produces the commodities, and those commodities are sold in the market for higher price, so that the capitalists accumulate wealth, they appropriate profits. You get my point? Suppose if you keep 10 crores, right, like that 10 crores will not be multiplied into 100 crores, right? 10 crores remain as 10 crores. But what is required? What Marx says? The capitalist will buy the labor power. Right? He invests the 10 crore for what? Maybe technology, raw material. But which is more important? Your labor is more important. So by paying the wages, he purchased the labor power to produce the commodities. And those commodities are sold in the market for higher price. So like that, capitalists try to appropriate capital so that they are able to accumulate more and more wealth. So that is why Marx said, in any capitalist society, rich become richer and the poor remain as the poor. Because always capitalist as an employer pay the low wages. The exploitation means in which form they exploit. They take the work but pay less wages. And what Marx says that the wages of the laborer is never equal to the wealth produced by him. Do you get my point? Suppose a worker is working for 8 hours, producing certain commodities, right? And if they are sold in the market, right, a capitalist will get, let us say, 10,000 rupees. But the worker is paid maybe 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees. Do you get my point? That means the wages paid by the employer to the employee is never equivalent to the wealth they produce. The capitalist might have invested money on raw material, technology, many things, right? But minus that, the capitalist may get maybe another 5,000 rupees. But even then, the capitalist will pay only 200, 300 rupees as the wages, not more than that. So rest of that money goes to the capitalist in the name of profit. So that is the basic nature of the capitalism. Then we justify. The capitalist ideology justify. That is why they create ideology. Capitalism as an ideology justify that, okay, he is investing money, he is buying raw material, he is investing on capital, right? He is producing commodities, selling those commodities in the market, and moreover he is providing employment to the employees. So what is wrong if they accumulate wealth? That is the justification. But what Marx says, it is not a real justification. It is not what you can say. It is not ethically correct. It is exploitation. But the Marxian argument is that the worker should get his due share, whatever he produces. But worker never get his due share. That is why Marx used the term called pauperization. He used the term called pauperization. Means what? In a capitalist society, the poor become much more poorer. Pauperization means extreme poverty. That means capitalism will create wealth only for a capitalist class, only for rich, but not to the poor. To get poor must be getting livelihood. Did you get my point? He must be earning money, but he will not become rich. For example, take any industry. No industrial worker will become crorepati, right? In the history, in the entire history, no industrial worker has become crorepati, right? But the employer, capitalist, become millionaire and billionaire. We have seen in India, within 20-25 years, right, many billionaires have emerged. They are able to amass wealth to the extent of lakhs of crores. How? How? For example, take Reliance Fresh. I am giving you example. They get the vegetables from the farm. They sell it, right? They clean it, they pack it, they sell it. And ultimately, whatever the profits that Reliance Fresh gets, that will be sent to Bombay for a person sitting there. But what this fellow get? 6,000, 7,000 salary. That's all. He is very happy that I am getting at least 10,000 salary. Because of that great man I am getting. But what Marx says, is it not exploitation? In a Marxian view, it is exploitation. Because without that is why Marx used the term called a class of producers and a class of non-producers. A person never contribute for production, get profit. To get my point, a person simply, they must be investing money, but are they contributing to the production? No, but still they accumulate wealth. So that is exploitation. That's what Marx says. Okay, so here let us go line by line. That I want to make you to understand, right? What is exploitation and oppression? How he has described the idea of contradiction between the forces and relations of production. Here, forces of production and relations of production may be illustrated in terms of infrastructure of capitalist industrial society. I told you, in any capitalist society, there are two aspects. One is forces of production and another one relations of production. Forces of production means what? I told you, land, capital, industry, technology, right? So what Marx says, it is the forces of production which determine the relations of production. Relations of production means what? Employer, employee. Whether you are employer or employee, that is determined by your relationship with the forces of production. For example, industry. Whether you are the owner of the industry or you work in the industry, that determine our relations. So in the whole society, the relations are based on what? Forces of production and relations of production. Suppose you are also a worker, I am also a worker. So our relationship is what? Worker-worker relationship. But I am the owner of the industry, you are the worker. So your relationship is what? I am the owner, you are the worker. So I am employer, you are employee. So which is determining our relationship? Forces of production are determining our relationship. Got it? So Marx maintained that only labor produces wealth. I told you, labor. Please, labor means what? That our physical energy or mental energy. In Marxian language, labor means the physical labor or mental labor to produce the commodity. Right? And I'll go very systematically. You please try to understand. Thus, wealth in capitalist society is produced by the labor power of the workers. So what Marx says, that capital might be important, but mere capital will not multiply capital, right? To get money might be important, but money cannot multiply money on its own, right? That money will be multiplied when you use the labor power. Labor, I told you, no. For example, today take software industry, right? The owner of the company use the mental power, mental energy of the large number of people, right? So that they are able to multiply money. Suppose you put aside the human beings, can he multiply wealth? Is it possible? No. So that means in Marxian view, labor is very important. So however, much of this wealth is appropriated in the form of profits by the capitalists, the owners of the means of production. The capitalists appropriate in the name of profit because they are the owners of the forces of production. So the wages of the workers are well below the value of the wealth they produce. Marx has written so systematically that he clearly explained what kind of economic system we have in entire world. So you take any society, there the wages of the workers are well below the value of the wealth they produce. Right? They produce lot of wealth, but in turn what they get? Nothing. So there is thus a contradiction between the forces of production, in particular the labor power. Forces of production, that is labor power of the workers, which produces wealth, and the relations of production which involve the appropriation of much of that wealth by the capitalists. The contradiction is between what? You see this sentence. There is thus a contradiction between the forces of production, right? In particular, the labor power. Labor power is one forces of production. Capital is another forces of production that create a relationship, right? So here, by exploiting the labor power, the relations of production which involve the appropriation of much that wealth by the capitalist. Since the capitalist is the owner of the forces of production, they appropriate the wealth in the name of what? Profit. So in Marxian language, even if you take a small shop, that the owner of the shop always want to exploit the worker. Suppose if we engage one or two workers, right? He want to exploit because he want to pay less wage because they want to earn more money. That is the nature of employer-employee relationship. Right? Sometimes employer might having a broad heart, but definitely they want to earn profit. If at all they want to earn more profit, they have to exploit the laborers. Huh? He lived with the people. He lived with the industry. He was an activist. Experiment means the society is the laboratory. Marx, he lived with the people, interacted with the people, observed the conditions in the factories in those days. And on the basis of observation, he has written. And he read the writings of many economists, and he has given his own interpretation. All these are the practical experiences of the Marx. Marx was not only a thinker, he was an activist. He was an activist. Activist means what? He fought on behalf of the working class. And among all the social scientists, I would like to say that Marx was the only social thinker who had a great concern for the working class. He had a great concern for the working class. He lived and he died for the working class people. And he lived with so much of poverty. If you read the history of the Marx, really it is so horrible. Marx was such a great intellectual. In fact, his writings have shook the world, entire world. But all the time he lived as a pauper. Pauper means what? Like a beggar he lived. And another important thing that almost every country, in every country, wherever he lived, he was what you can say, thrown away from that country. Because always he was anti-state, anti-capitalist view. So the state, the governments, the employers, the capitalists of those days, they never wanted Marx to live there. Ikkada unte pedda danger idi, inanu pampiyalaneshi. In every country they have ostracized. But only country, that UK, given shelter at the end of his life. And every day he used to, if you read about Marx, every day he used to stay in British Library. You know British Library? One of the biggest library which was utilized by two important persons in the world. One is Marx, another one Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. These are the two persons who have fully utilized the British Library. And Engels was his good friend. You know, Marx and Engels, they have written Friedrich Engels. Engels was a good friend of Marx, but he was an industrialist. Not capitalist, he was an industrialist with Marxist thinking. So actually he supported the Marx and his family. And because of the support of Engels, Marx was able to survive. To get my point, Marx has supported them. Engels supported Marx. Then it was Engels who actually published the writings of the Marx. Otherwise, the Marxian writings would not have come into light without Engels. That is called Das Kapital. That is the Capital. That is in different volumes. That was published even after the death of Marx. Published by Engels. And you see, the life was so tragic. If you read the Marxian, when Marx was alive, his children have died. All his children have died because he could not feed them. They did not get money because his earning was so less. He was only a writer. He used to write for newspapers so that he used to get some money. And he could not provide proper food to his wife and children. And his children have died because of starvation. And there are certain letters which were published by Engels later. Once they were suffering, one child has died, another child is suffering. The Marx wife write a letter to the Engels. Enta tragedy untadante, my child is crying for milk, but I am not able to get milk, and I am not able to give milk because breastfeeding the mother has to do, no. there is only blood, no milk, then ultimately the child has died because she did not have food. How can she feed the child? Like that, children have died. Later on, wife has died, but still he fought for the working class population. That is the sacrifice made by Marx. Engels have published all those letters written by wife of Marx. So that means Marx, why I am saying this, whether Marxian theory is relevant or not, that's a different story. And there were many reinterpretations of Marxian theory. Actually, Marx never wanted violence. He made it very clear. But unfortunately, this Maoism, all that later, they have come later. All those are the interpretations. But Marx wanted an egalitarian society. He wanted proletarian revolution for the sake of an egalitarian society. Marx never wanted violence. But people say that Marx promoted violence. No, Marx never promoted violence. So like that, he had a lot of concern for the working class population. That's what I want to tell. Okay. Then let us discuss. A related contradiction involves the technical organization of labor and the nature of ownership. This technical organization of labor and the nature of ownership. In capitalist society, the forces of production include the collective production of goods by large numbers of workers in factories. Every line is important. Wherever you feel, you please write down these points. Then at the means of production are privately owned and the profits are appropriated by individuals. Here, means of production. What is meant by means of production? The means are like what in an industry, the technology, raw material, capital. These are the means of production. So these means of production are owned by a capitalistic class, an employer. So therefore they appropriate profits. Okay. Then the contradiction between the forces and relations of production. Here forces means forces of production and relations of production. There are two terms. Always Marx used this term, forces of production and relations of production. So forces of production and relations of production lies in the social collectives, nature of production, and the private and individual nature of ownership. He said forces of production are always owned by individual. Right? That means only few people own and control the forces of production. Marx believed that these and other contradictions would eventually lead to the downfall of the capitalist system. Yeah, Marx was so optimistic. Marx was never pessimist. Marx always used to be optimistic in everything. But what Marx says, yes, the capitalism means exploitation. But this exploitation will not continue forever. This exploitation will not continue forever. Someday the capitalism will dismantle. So for this what he says, the seeds of capitalism will sow the seeds of its own destruction. This is the Marxian statement. Capitalism will sow the seeds of its own destruction. And once a question was asked, statement, elaborate. Means what? What Marx says, that whatever the conditions that are created by capitalism, that itself sown the seeds of its own destruction. For example, say capitalist class, right? They create advanced technology. They use technology in production, right? For their own benefit, right? Of course, they contribute for development. But whatever the development that takes place, that is helpful for the working class to mobilize themselves. The working class, all of them, they come together. They realize that they are being exploited by the capitalist class, and so that they will revolt against the capitalist class. So that means he was of the opinion that one day or the other, the working class will revolt against the capitalist class, so that capitalism will be dismantled and a new system will emerge. That was a socialism to begin with, later on communism. That's what he says. That's why he used this term. Capitalism will sow the seeds of its own destruction. Right? Then he maintained that by its very nature, capitalism involves the exploitation and oppression of the worker. Right? By nature, capitalism is what? Exploitation and oppression. He believed that the conflict of interest between capital and labor, there is a conflict of interest between capital and labor. What is this conflict? Conflict for what? They have their own. So capitalists want to accumulate wealth, more and more wealth. But at the same time, laborer want more and more wages. Both of them, they have their own interest. So naturally, this that result into conflict of interest between a capitalist class and working class, which involves one group gaining at the expense of the other, could not be resolved within the framework of a capitalist economy. Since there is a lot of expression and suppression, the capitalists gain initially, right, in spite of having a conflict of interest. But in the course of time, I told you, he was optimist that one day the working class will realize, then they will revolt against the capitalist class, so that that would lead to change. That's why then next concept he says contradiction and change. Yes? Yeah, one and the same. Forces of production and means of economic production, one and the same. He used a different term. When you call forces of production like land, capital, technology, that is forces of production. But when we use those forces of production to produce something, then it becomes means of economic production. That's why Marx, somewhere he used the term forces of production, but somewhere he used means of economic production. For it comes to a factory, right? In a factory, you are using capital, technology, raw material to produce commodities. Then there, which is appropriate? Means of economic production. That is the term he used. But more or less same. Yeah, now coming to contradiction and change. Marx saw history as divided into a number of time periods or epoch. Epochs means it is a stage. Different stages, right? Being characterized by a particular mode of production. I told you, each stage they have their own mode of production. For example, primitive society, a primitive mode of production, because all of them had equal relationship with the forces of production, because there was no private property. Ancient society, Ancient society means what? Where slowly agriculture has developed. And they have ancient mode of production where master and slaves. Then third, a feudal society where feudal mode of production, because the land is owned by the landlord and you can find the wage workers. Then next one is capitalism. There was a capitalist mode of production. That means where industries emerge. Then goods are produced. That is called capitalist mode of production. So that means each stage had a particular mode of production in which you can find one is investor, another one is a producer. Right? One is an investor, capitalist is an investor, but worker is a producer who create commodities. And those commodities are sold in the market. So major changes in history are the result of new forces of production. What Marx believed that societies are not static, they are dynamic. Right? Marx was of the opinion that societies undergo change as there is an advancement in the economic system. As there is an advancement in the economic system, society will transform from one stage to another stage. So like that, primitive to ancient, ancient to feudal, feudal to capitalist. The transition took place because of advancement in the economic system, right? For example, take feudal society. In feudal society, there was a surplus production. Right? They were able to create surplus wealth. That wealth is used for the establishment of industries. Like a new economy has developed. That is why every stage, right, is not a static stage. Right? Society move from one stage to another stage. And every stage is an advanced stage when compared to its previous stage. That is why Marx said communist society would be an advanced kind of society when compared to capitalism. Did you get my point? Like that. So thus the change from feudal to capitalist society stemmed from emergence and during the feudal epoch of the forces of production of industrial society. So society has transformed from what? Feudal economy to industrial economy. So that is why capitalism has emerged. Then this resulted in a contradiction between the new forces of production. Then when economic system undergo change, new forces of production will emerge. For example, in a feudal society, land was the main source of income. So land was the determining force. But in an industrial society, in a capitalism, the capital, right, in a capitalist industrial society, required relations of production based on wage labor rather than the traditional ties of landlord and serf. Right? The relations of landlord and serf are replaced with a capitalist and employee. New relations will emerge. So when they reach a certain point in their development, the new forces of production will lead to the creation of a new set of relations of production. Always I told you, as there is a change in economy, right, the new forces of production will emerge so that new relations will emerge. For example, in ancient society, right, the relations were like what? Master and slave. But when society transformed from ancient to feudal, then new relations have come up. Like what? Feudal landlord and serf. Then Agrarian economy has transformed as an industrial economy. So new relations have emerged like capitalist and laborer. So like that, always when there is a change in the economic system, the new forces of production will emerge, so that new relations will emerge. So then a new epoch of history will be born, which will sleep away the social relationships of the old order. That means the old order will thrown away and new order will emerge. That's what he says. Then, however, the final epoch of history, the communist or socialist society. The Marx talked about 4 stages, but he visualized 5th stage. So the final stage in the history is what? Communist society or socialist society, that Marx believed would eventually supplant capitalism. I told you, Marx was optimist that capitalism will be supplanted by communism. To begin with socialism, then communism, and will not result from a new forces of production. Rather, it will develop from a resolution of the contradictions contained within the capitalist system. That means what? Marx said new forces of production will not come. The forces of production remain same. That means industries, technology, raw material, they remain same. But the ownership will change. Why? Because through proletarian revolution, right, the capitalists are overthrown and the industries, technology, raw material are taken over by the working class. So everybody will be reduced to the level of what? A worker. So he visualized a socialist society where the industries, technology and capital are owned by the collectivity of workers. So that means there will be only one class. That is what? Only workers. So the capitalist class will be eliminated. Eliminated means not they are not killed. They will be reduced to the level of a worker. So everybody is the worker and everybody is the owner. So Marx has given one principle that everybody has to work according to their ability and everybody has to share according to their need. Do you get my point? That was the principle. Each according to their ability and each according to their need. That was the principle. Do you get my point? Nobody is allowed to accumulate more and more wealth. But wealth is created. But wealth is created for what? Wealth is created for the benefit of the society. What Marx says that in a socialist society, everybody will be provided a decent housing. Everybody will be provided a good education, good health care facilities. That means everybody lead a quality life. Why? Because the wealth is used for the benefit of all. Under capitalism, the wealth was accumulated in the hands of few. Right? So that is why what he said, the collective production will be transformed. Ownership of the means of production will be collective rather than that their labor produces. No longer will one social group exploit and oppress another. In a communism, there would be no exploitation, no suppression, because everybody is the worker, everybody is the owner. So this will produce an infrastructure without contradiction and conflict. Earlier in infrastructure, you have two classes, right? I told you, dominant class and subject class. But now with the emergence of communism, there will be only one social class. That is, all are producers, all are owners. Then in Marx's view, this would mean the end of history, since communist society would no longer contain contradictions which generate change. What Marx says, once the communist society emerge, there would be no contradiction, no conflict, no exploitation, no oppression. So society will not change. Society reaches to its highest point, but which is an idealistic society. That is why Marxian communism is considered as a utopia. Some sociologists used the term called Marxian communism as what? Utopia. Utopia means what? An idealistic society which is generally not possible. Do you get my point? Generally we use the term heaven and hell. It is a utopia. It's a concept of utopia. Nobody knows how Swargam is there, how Narkam is there. No? Nobody knows. So it's like Marx visualized such kind of society, but where everybody lead a quality life. But it is a utopia. It's so far nowhere it has happened.